The gavel echoed sharply through the packed courtroom as Sterling Coleman, a man with a composed demeanor, rose amidst the stunned gazes. He adjusted his tie, scanned the crowd, and paused at the two ashen-faced police officers on the opposite side. Silence descended, broken only by the rapid breathing of the onlookers. "My name is Sterling Coleman," he said, his voice deep yet incisive, "and I am the chief of police of this city." The room erupted in whispers, reporters outside the window scrambled, and the two officers hung their heads, their smugness evaporating. He continued, his gaze unwavering as he addressed the judge. "I was appointed to rectify this system, and today, you have seen why." His words hung in the air, a declaration of war. Before we delve into this narrative, please let us know where you're watching from. Share your city or country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Tomorrow, we will bring you another inspiring story, tailored just for you. From here, the story rewinds to that fateful night when patrol lights slashed through the dark sky. The crunch of tires on gravel broke the stillness of the evening as Sterling Coleman, a composed 48-year-old man with a renowned leadership reputation, turned onto Sycamore Avenue. He was returning from a long but fulfilling day, following a meeting with community leaders in Charlotte, North Carolina. His modest black sedan blended into the suburban streets, his mind drifting toward his wife's famed pot roast awaiting him at home. Then, the flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror sliced through the night like an alarm bell. Sterling's hands tightened on the steering wheel for a fleeting moment. He glanced at his speedometer, 29 in a 35 zone, no traffic violations, no malfunctioning taillights. Yet, the patrol car's siren wailed, signaling him to pull over. "Stay calm," he told himself, signaling and slowly guiding his car to the curb. He knew the drill, hands visible, slow movements, courteous demeanor. It was a routine he had mastered, not because he had ever done anything wrong, but because he understood that in these situations, appearances could determine everything. The first officer approached the window briskly, flashlight in hand, its beam cutting through the dim interior of Sterling's car. Another officer lingered near the rear bumper, hand resting on his holstered firearm. "You in a hurry tonight?" The first officer grunted, his tone heavy with suspicion. "No, sir," Sterling replied calmly, his voice steady. "Just heading home." The officer's flashlight scanned Sterling's face, pausing for an extra beat before sweeping down to his lap, the dashboard, and then back to his face. "License and registration," he commanded, ignoring Sterling's response. Sterling reached for the glove compartment slowly, speaking as he moved. "I'm getting the registration. My license is in my wallet. I'll get that after." The officer didn't reply, but his posture stiffened. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" the officer asked, though the question sounded more like a declaration. Before Sterling could respond, the officer continued, "You were swerving back there, crossing into the other lane." Sterling frowned. "Sir, I wasn't swerving. My dash cam can verify that." The officer cut him off abruptly. "Dash cam? Huh? That'll be confiscated as evidence. Step out of the car." Sterling blinked, surprised by the sudden escalation. "Is there a problem, sir?" "I'm cooperating fully." The officer's jaw tightened. "I said step out of the car. Now." Sterling's stomach clenched, but he unbuckled his seatbelt and slowly opened the door, raising his hands visibly. The second officer moved in quickly, gripping Sterling's arm and yanking him toward the patrol car. "Is this really necessary?" Sterling asked, his voice calm yet firm. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Resisting, are we?" the first officer scoffed. "You want to play that game? Fine by us." The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Sterling's wrists, his mind reeling. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was blatant racial profiling. As the officers shoved him into the back of the patrol car, Sterling glanced down the street. A few neighbors peeked through their curtains, their silhouettes illuminated by porch lights. No one came out, but this was far from over. The officers had no idea who they had just arrested, and Sterling had no intention of staying silent for much longer. The patrol car rattled slightly as it pulled away, Sterling sitting upright in the back seat. He looked out the window, familiar landmarks blurring past, but his mind barely registered the scenery. Instead, he was trying to process the sheer absurdity of what had just transpired. The two officers in the front chatted casually, as if they hadn't just handcuffed and detained a man without cause. The younger officer, Daniels, glanced at Sterling through the rearview mirror. "So, what's your story? Late-night drug run? Or do you just enjoy making our lives difficult?" Sterling met Daniels' eyes unflinchingly. "I'm just a man trying to get home." "Yeah, right." The other officer, a burly man named Reed, snorted. "We hear that all the time." Reckless drivers always have an excuse. Sterling clenched his jaw. Arguing would be futile at this point. He took a deep breath, considering his options. He knew his rights, he knew the system, and he knew how slim his chances were of that system siding with him at this moment. When they arrived at the police station, fluorescent lights glared down on the holding area. Daniels removed Sterling's handcuffs with an almost mocking flourish. "Welcome to our humble abode. You'll be staying here for a while." "What am I being charged with?" Sterling asked calmly, rubbing his wrists. Reed smirked. "We'll let you know after we figure it out. Just sit tight." Sterling was led to a small, frigid cell, the door slamming shut behind him, the sound echoing through the air. He sat on the bench, his mind swirling with thoughts. He had spent years building a career on justice and fairness, and now he was subjected to the very abusive power he had worked to eliminate. Outside the cell, the two officers leaned against a desk, chuckling as they examined Sterling's driver's license and registration. "Nothing unusual," Daniels said, a hint of disappointment in his voice. "Doesn't matter," Reed replied with a smirk. "We'll find something. Guys like him always have dark secrets." Sterling overheard their conversation, his expression remaining impassive. He sat there, hands clasped, posture solid. He wasn't angry, he was calculating. He knew his patience would soon be rewarded. Hours dragged on, other officers passing by, glancing at the man in the cell with curiosity. None of them recognized him, but Sterling hadn't expected them to. He was new to the area, having taken the position only 3 weeks prior. Finally, as dawn began to paint faint streaks across the sky, Sterling heard footsteps approaching. A stern-faced female officer, clearly of higher rank, appeared before the cell. Her badge read Lieutenant Morgan. She carried an air of authority and professionalism, a stark contrast to the two officers from the night before. She frowned as she looked at Sterling, then back at the paperwork in her hands. "What's going on here?" Daniels stepped forward. "Brought him in last night for reckless driving and resisting arrest." Morgan raised an eyebrow. "Reckless driving? Where's the evidence?" "We're still processing it," Reed said nonchalantly, leaning against the desk. Morgan turned her attention back to Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, do you know why you were pulled over?" Sterling stood up, meeting her eyes calmly. "I was told it was for reckless driving, which I categorically deny. I also have a dash cam that can corroborate my statement." Morgan's expression hardened as she glanced at the two officers. "You haven't reviewed his dash cam footage?" Reed shrugged. "We haven't gotten around to it yet." Morgan exhaled sharply, clearly displeased. "Review it now." "And Daniels, in my office." "Now." As the two officers shuffled away, Sterling knew the tide was beginning to turn, but this was only the beginning of their comeuppance. The cold metal bench pressed against Sterling's back as he sat in the cell, observing the bustling activity of the police station. The minutes stretched into eternity, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of paperwork or distant conversations. Though his surroundings were still, Sterling's mind was anything but. He replayed the events of the previous night, running them through his mind like a film. Each sharp word, each unnecessary escalation, served as a stark reminder of the deep-seated flaws he had spent years fighting to rectify. His new position as chief of police was an opportunity to address these issues from the inside, to cultivate a culture of accountability. And now, he was experiencing the very injustice he had sworn to eliminate. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Lieutenant Morgan returned, holding a tablet. She gestured for him to come closer to the bars. "We reviewed your dash cam footage," she said, her tone crisp and professional. "I also spoke with the arresting officers. To put it bluntly, this shouldn't have happened. The footage directly contradicts their report." Sterling raised an eyebrow, unsurprised but waiting for her to continue. "I'm releasing you immediately," she added. "But I'd like to discuss the next steps in private." A few minutes later, Sterling was out of the cell and seated across from Morgan in her office. The room was Spartan, with a plain desk, a couple of chairs, and a small filing cabinet. No frills, no distractions, just business. "I'm filing a report against Daniels and Reed," Morgan began, folding her hands on the desk. "But there's something I need to ask." She hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. "Who are you, really? You're far too composed for someone who just spent a night in a cell for nothing." Sterling leaned back slightly, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "I appreciate your diligence, Lieutenant, but let's just say I've been in situations like this before. I've learned to keep my cool." Morgan studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. But I have a feeling this won't be the last we hear of this situation." As Sterling left the police station, the early morning sun warmed his face, but the weight of the previous night still lingered on his shoulders. He didn't go straight home. Instead, he drove to his office, parked in his reserved spot, and walked through the doors of the police headquarters he now oversaw. His assistant, Anita, looked up from her desk, startled. "Chief Coleman, you're in early." Sterling nodded, his expression neutral. "It was a long night." "Anita, please prepare the conference room for me. I need to address the entire department this afternoon." Anita nodded quickly, sensing the gravity in his voice. As Sterling entered his office and closed the door behind him, he let out a deep sigh. He knew what was coming. This wasn't just about him. It was about what his experience represented. The public trusted him to lead, to protect, and to hold others accountable. That responsibility weighed heavily, but Sterling welcomed it. But before he could act, there was one more storm to weather: the courtroom, where everything would be laid bare. The courtroom was packed, news of the case having spread quickly, with local media outlets eager to cover the proceedings. Cameras were not allowed inside, but that didn't stop reporters from lining the courthouse steps, ready to pounce the moment the hearing concluded. Sterling sat silently at the defense table, his attorney, Sandra Reyes, flipping through a thick folder of evidence. Sandra was a formidable force, sharp, unrelenting, and known for dismantling flimsy arguments with surgical precision. Across the room, officers Daniels and Reed sat with their court-appointed attorney. Daniels looked anxious, his leg tapping incessantly, while Reed tried to project an air of nonchalance, leaning back in his chair with a smug expression. The judge, an elderly man with a stern demeanor, entered the room and called the court to order. "We are here today to address the charges against Mr. Sterling Coleman. Prosecution, you may proceed." The prosecutor, a young and somewhat hesitant attorney, rose and began to outline the case as it had been initially reported. On the night in question, the defendant was observed driving recklessly, swerving into another lane. Upon being pulled over by officers Daniels and Reed, he became uncooperative and resisted arrest. Sandra suppressed a smile. She leaned toward Sterling and whispered, "They're digging their own grave." When her turn came, Sandra stood confidently, her voice resonating through the room. "Your Honor, the charges against my client are not only baseless but a direct result of racial profiling and abuse of power. To demonstrate this, I would like to present video evidence that directly contradicts the officer's testimony." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Sandra signaled to the court clerk, who dimmed the lights and began playing the dashcam footage. The room fell silent as the video showed Sterling driving steadily in his lane, the speedometer reading a constant 29 miles per hour. The officer's patrol car was visible in the rearview mirror, its lights flashing for no apparent reason. Next, the body cam footage played. The courtroom watched as the officers approached Sterling's car, their aggressive tone evident from the start. The video captured Daniels muttering under his breath, another one of them causing trouble, followed by Reed chuckling and replying, "Par for the course." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The judge frowned deeply, glancing at the officers. Sandra paused the video and addressed the court. "This is the level of professionalism exhibited by officers Daniels and Reed. Now, let's fast forward to the arrest." The footage resumed, showing Sterling calmly complying, narrating his movements as he retrieved his registration and license. The stark contrast between his composed demeanor and the officer's hostility was palpable. As the video concluded, the courtroom was thick with tension. Sandra turned to the jury and said, "This is not just an abuse of power, it's a direct violation of my client's rights, rooted in bias and prejudice." The prosecutor stood, visibly flustered. The officers believed they had probable cause. Sandra interjected sharply. Probable cause based on what? Driving safely? Following instructions? Or perhaps his skin color? The judge tapped his gavel, calling for order. "Let's stick to the facts." Sandra's voice softened, but her words remained powerful. "Your Honor, before we proceed any further, my client has something he wishes to share with the court." Sterling rose, adjusting his tie. He scanned the room, meeting the officer's eyes before addressing the judge. "My name is Sterling Coleman," he said, his voice calm yet resolute. "I am the chief of police of this city. I was appointed 3 weeks ago to lead this department and address the very issues you have seen here today. I chose not to reveal my position earlier because I wanted the truth to come to light organically, without bias or interference, and now it has." Murmurs erupted throughout the room. Danielle's face paled, while Reed's smugness evaporated instantly. The judge repeatedly tapped his gavel, demanding silence. Sterling continued, "This isn't just about me. It's about a system that allows officers like Daniels and Reed to operate without accountability. That ends now. But this moment was not just a revelation, but a reckoning, one that would reverberate far beyond the courtroom walls. A tense hush fell over the courtroom as Sterling sat down, his final words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. Daniels and Reed sat motionless, their faces a mix of shock and dread. The judge called for a brief recess, allowing everyone time to absorb what had just transpired. When the court reconvened, the tone had shifted dramatically. The prosecution offered no further arguments, and the judge swiftly dismissed the charges against Sterling. But that was only the beginning. As Sterling exited the courthouse, reporters swarmed him, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. "Chief Coleman, do you have a statement regarding the case?" one shouted. Sterling raised a hand for silence, the crowd quieting, eager for his response. "This case isn't just about me," he began, his voice steady and resolute. "It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that everyone, regardless of who they are, is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. As chief of police, I'm committed to building a department that values integrity and justice, and as a citizen, I will continue to fight for justice." The media frenzy continued, but Sterling didn't linger. He had more pressing matters to address. The repercussions from the case were swift. Daniels and Reed were immediately placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. Public outrage mounted as the footage was released to the press, sparking protests and calls for reform. Community leaders rallied, demanding greater transparency and improved training for the department's officers. Sterling's leadership took on a new significance. He called an emergency meeting, gathering the department's officers. Standing at the front of the room, he addressed them with unwavering conviction. "What happened to me last night was not an isolated incident," Sterling said, his gaze sweeping across the room. "It's a symptom. This isn't just an abuse of power, it's a direct violation of my client's rights, rooted in bias and prejudice." The prosecutor stood, visibly flustered. The officers believed they had probable cause. Sandra interjected sharply. Probable cause based on what? Driving safely? Following instructions? Or perhaps his skin color? The judge tapped his gavel, calling for order. "Let's stick to the facts." Sandra's voice softened, but her words remained powerful. "Your Honor, before we proceed any further, my client has something he wishes to share with the court." Sterling stood, adjusting his tie. He scanned the room, meeting the officer's eyes before addressing the judge. "My name is Sterling Coleman," he said, his voice calm yet resolute. "I am the chief of police of this city. I was appointed 3 weeks ago to lead this department and address the very issues you have seen here today. I chose not to reveal my position earlier because I wanted the truth to come to light organically, without bias or interference, and now it has." Murmurs erupted throughout the room. Danielle's face paled, while Reed's smugness evaporated instantly. The judge repeatedly tapped his gavel, demanding silence. Sterling continued, "This isn't just about me. It's about a system that allows officers like Daniels and Reed to operate without accountability. That ends now. But this moment was not just a revelation, but a reckoning, one that would reverberate far beyond the courtroom walls. A tense hush fell over the courtroom as Sterling sat down, his final words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. Daniels and Reed sat motionless, their faces a mix of shock and dread. The judge called for a brief recess, allowing everyone time to absorb what had just transpired. When the court reconvened, the tone had shifted dramatically. The prosecution offered no further arguments, and the judge swiftly dismissed the charges against Sterling. But that was only the beginning. As Sterling exited the courthouse, reporters swarmed him, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. "Chief Coleman, do you have a statement regarding the case?" one shouted. Sterling raised a hand for silence, the crowd quieting, eager for his response. "This case isn't just about me," he began, his voice steady and resolute. "It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that everyone, regardless of who they are, is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. As chief of police, I'm committed to building a department that values integrity and justice, and as a citizen, I will continue to fight for justice." The media frenzy continued, but Sterling didn't linger. He had more pressing matters to address. The repercussions from the case were swift. Daniels and Reed were immediately placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. Public outrage mounted as the footage was released to the press, sparking protests and calls for reform. Community leaders rallied, demanding greater transparency and improved training for the department's officers. Sterling's leadership took on a new significance. He called an emergency meeting, gathering the department's officers. Standing at the front of the room, he addressed them with unwavering conviction. "What happened to me last night was not an isolated incident, Sterling said, his gaze sweeping across the room. It's a symptom. Sterling Coleman's story is not just a personal journey, but a powerful reminder of justice, courage, and change. What do you think of his decisions? If you were in his shoes, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments. You never know, your story might inspire someone. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to share it with friends and family to spread the message of accountability and fairness. Thank you for watching. Stay with us as we explore more meaningful stories. Have a wonderful day filled with energy and peace. Thank you for supporting our channel. Please like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared to promote humanistic values in life and have been rewritten with the assistance of AI. If there are any errors, please excuse them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.